Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Math with Mr. W. Today's discussion is about multiplication and division of fractions. Because you see down toward the bottom here, we have some fractions. And I really need for you folks to listen, because I know that you guys have this same problem probably as I seem to think about it. Ninth graders seem to sort of understand this as a kind of a natural thing, maybe. But I can imagine when a fourth grader first sees this, that this is not that simple. So let's kind of review what we already know, okay? So we know that we have 16 times 2 makes 32. So I'm going to keep this side the same. And what I want to do here is I want to create patterns. So if I create patterns, it's going to make it easier for the youngster perhaps to understand what's taking place. So I'm going to allow this number on this side to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So how does that affect my solution when I'm multiplying? Well, the student might just say, well, yeah, it's got to get smaller. Well, let's see what happens. Well, 16 times 2 is 32, and then we get 16, 8, 4, 2, and then we have 1/2 times 2 is really 2 1/2s, which is 1. And then we have a fourth of 2. So we're really saying how many fourths? Down to a fourth, a quarter of 2, and that's 1/2. So if we look at the number from 0 to 2, we've got 1, 2, and 1/4 of that is really 1/2. And we see that when we factor the 2 with the 4, and we multiply straight across, and we get 1/2. Now, that's multiplying. But what happens when I divide? And this is a struggle, see, because now when I've multiplied by a fraction, something less than 1, the answer came out to be less than what I started with. See, 2 times 1/2 is less than that. 2 times 1/4 is even less than that. So the student has to recognize that his answer has to make sense. Again, it's about number sense. Now, let's take a look at this 32 divided by 2. So we're going to keep our divisor the same, but this time we're going to make the number get smaller until we reach a fraction. So this time we're going to be dividing into a fraction. We're dividing the same number, which is a whole number, into a fraction. So when we divide 32 by 2, we get 16. Then 16 by 2, we get 8. So 8 divided by 2 is 4 and 2. So what's happening? Everything's getting cut in half. 2 divided by 2 is 1. The identity. The identity. Now 1 divided by 2. I'm taking the length of 1, but I'm cutting it into 2 pieces. And each piece is called 1/2 of that. Each piece is called 1/2 of that. Now, what happens when I take 1/2 and divide it by 2? Now, my pattern tells me what has to happen. It has to be 1/4. But how do I get to 1/4? That's the crucial part. Because in order for me to get to this part right here, 1/2 has to be multiplied by 1/2. That means something had to change in the 2. Dividing by 2 had to be the same as multiplying by 1/2 in order to get this 1/4. So we're forced to recognize that this idea, this reciprocal, the reciprocal of the number, this is 2 over 1, and I just flipped it over and made it 1 over 2. So I couldn't do anything with division. I had to flip it over, and then I could multiply. And then my answer would be 1/4. So now we know what happens when we're dividing by a fraction. But what happens over here if my divisor keeps getting smaller and my number that I'm dividing into stays the same? Not like this one. Here my divisor stayed the same and this number kept getting smaller. It's the opposite of that. What happens when my dividend stays the same, but the divisor is getting smaller? 32 divided by 32 is 1. 32 divided by 16 is 2. Well, 32 divided by 8 is 4. By 4 is 8. By 2 is 16. 32 divided by 1 is 32. But now, what happens when I take 32 and divide it by a half? If we remember what we learned over here, we can't divide it by a half. We have to do something with it first. We have to use the reciprocal of the number. So this has to become 32 times 2 over 1, which equals 64. How about that? And our pattern works out just fine. Now, folks, let's take a look at that last piece again. We had 32 divided by a half, and it said it was 64. So come on up here, and let's take a look at that again. 32 divided by a half, and we said that was 64. So if 16 is divided by a half, it should be half of 64. It should be 32. And then 8 divided by a half is going to be 16. And someone's going to say, stop, I think I get it. I think I get it. Because we're asking how many halves are there in the number we have here? That's right. How many halves can I put into that number? Again, the word into, which is the prime idea for division. Into. So 4 divided by a half is 8. 2 divided by a half is 4. As our pattern continues, 1 divided by a half is going to be 2. And then a half divided by a half, it's going to have to be our identity, 1. And now we have a 4th divided by a half. A 4th divided by a half. Well, that's got to be a half. Because when I flip this over, I have 1/4 times 2 over 1. And when I multiply straight across, I get 2 over 4. And that reduces to 1/2. 2/4 equals 1/2. So we had to use our reciprocal when we divide by a fraction. So division by a fraction requires us to use the reciprocal of that fraction. Then we can multiply. So I hope this set of patterns has been of use to you. it's been very useful for my students in the past. And the idea of watching numbers get smaller or larger really makes things more useful for them, gives them more of a number sense. Take this, use it. I hope you have a great day. See you next time on Math with Mr. W.